Welcome to everyone who's joining us for the recruitment session for political science. My name is Melanie Thomas. I'm the graduate program director in the Department of Political Science at the University of Calgary. And with me today, I've also got Denise Retzlaff and Ryan Crosschild. So Denise, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll go on to Ryan after that.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm the graduate program administrator for political science. So when you have questions about the program or your initial application to the program, it would come to me and I would be the one that you correspond with. And then should you have academic questions, we would forward those on to Dr. Thomas or some of our other researchers and faculty members on staff.
Perfect. And then Ryan, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Crosschild. I'm a first-year PhD student. I also was a master's student in the Department of Political Science as well at the University of Calgary. I'm really excited to be here and to share with you some of my own experiences as a graduate student and the just the amazing kind of atmosphere, learning environment that the department has to offer, and also just the supportive cohort structure that has kind of been created at the university in the Department of Political Science. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this engagement. Thank you.
Great, excellent. So what we're going to do first is we've got a presentation of the basics of our program. And so here, I'm just going to give you, actually, I'll just show you the agenda. So we'll talk about who we are at the University of Calgary with our graduate programs, the programs that we offer, requirements in terms of subfield specializations. And this is kind of a general way that political science organizes itself. But then what I really want to highlight is our research streams. And these cut typically across subfield specializations. And so depending on what you're interested in, the research streams will highlight where our research excellence is. And then we'll turn it over to Ryan to talk about his experience as a student in our program. And then we'll finish off with how to apply to come and join us next year. Okay, so who we are, the Department of Political Science. This is back when we could get together and take photos side by side. This is our last department photo. But we are a diverse, dynamic group of political science scholars. I think our faculty complement is, we're certainly over 20, but under 30. So we're a mid-sized department, one of the larger in Canada, but certainly not the largest. And what this means is that we can offer a really multifaceted engagement in terms of what political science is, while also providing a lot of in-depth one-on-one support. Okay, so specifically for graduate students, we have three options for folks who are looking for a graduate degree from the University of Calgary. We've got the MA thesis, or the MA through a course-based approach. We have the MA through a thesis-based approach, and we also have a PhD. So at a glance, this is what our course-based MA looks like. This is a new program, so we'll be having our first cohort of course-based master's students coming in for fall 2021. The program is designed to be completed in 1 year, where there is a research component to it. So it is eligible for lucrative scholarships, particularly from the federal tri-councils, so the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. So there's a major research project, but the point is that this would be for folks who want a 1-year option. This is the option that we would recommend. So there's an expectation that students will do a minimum of 24 units, but this is basically 4 courses per term. And then the last course component would be your major research paper. For those of you who have done an honors thesis, this is like a step up from your honors thesis. So your honors thesis is, when I supervise them, I see them as like 6,000 or 7,000 words, and they're, an intensive research question. A major research paper for the course-based MA is about 9,000 words, which is the standard in political science for a journal article. So for folks that might want to write a journal article, this is the kind of project that you would be set up for this. our course-based MA students will likely, if we are able to be back on campus anytime in the next academic year or so, we allocate shared space. And this is one of the benefits of our program, is that we have space for our students inside the department, which means that there's great access to faculty, to your fellow students, and to staff for when you have questions. Okay. That's the course-based at a glance. The thesis-based at a glance, this is our 2-year master's program. This is what Ryan did. This is also what I did a long time ago. What makes it a 2-year program is that the first year is focused on your coursework, and the second year is focused on a thesis. And so the thesis itself is going to go through a much more intense evaluation process, where you would complete the thesis, you'd have an examination committee, and then you would have an oral defense. It's a lower risk version of what we would expect for a PhD, certainly. And so what the thesis enables students to do is a really in-depth study and an independent research-driven study of a question where you're actually like, it's a serious research undertaking. So your MA thesis can be anywhere between 90 to 120 pages or 30,000 words. So it's expected that you'd have several chapters, like a setup, a bunch of analysis, and then like you would kind of wrap it up with the conclusion. Our thesis-based students, because they are doing an intensive research process, we guarantee them a desk in the department, because we see the need for that kind of mentorship, particularly with the thesis part. And for the thesis-based program, we also guarantee, or those students may be guaranteed more funding, precisely because they're going to be in the program for longer. Okay. Oh, and I should say, for the thesis-based, there are fewer courses than what you'd be taking for the course-based masters, in part because a lot of the training for the course-based masters, the training comes through courses primarily. And for the thesis-based, because a chunk of the training is the thesis itself, there are fewer courses to complete, because we want students to focus on that thesis. Okay, finally, for the PhD, like most Canadian programs, we ask students to have a master's degree before they apply to our PhD program. We recommend that our PhD program length is 4 years, though students will have a maximum to go to 6 years with this. The first year would be coursework. The second year would be candidacy exams to a set field list that we have. And if students have questions about what that specifically looks like, I'd be happy to answer that later. And then they would complete a dissertation. And a dissertation is it's between 250 to 300 pages. So it's like, I don't want to say it's like writing a book, but it's definitely a project of that scope. For doctoral students, they would do their coursework, they would do a field of study examination, and then they would get that, then they would move on to their dissertation stuff. All of our PhD students have guaranteed funding for the 4 years of their program, because we would see this very much as their full-time job as a PhD student. Okay, so if you come to do a master's or a PhD in the Department of Political Science, one of the things that our program requires is that students affiliate with 1 or 2 of 5 subfields. And so for PhD students, this would be where your candidacy exams would be run. For master's students, this would be where your course requirements would draw from your 2 fields that you would choose. So you choose 2 from the following 5. Canadian politics, Indigenous politics, political theory, comparative politics, and international relations. So all of our courses that we offer, for the most part, fit under those or into those broad 5 buckets. So for me, as a Canadian politics specialist, I would be in Canadian, and then my second field is comparative. I know we have lots of folks who are doing Indigenous politics, and then their second field could be Canadian, depending on what they want to look at, comparative, IR, or theory. So you can choose based on the research specialization that you want to engage in. There's a lot of flexibility, even though you're choosing under these 2 broad umbrellas. Most political science programs are like this, where they would make you self-identify with 2 of whatever fields that they specialize in. I would say where Calgary is unique is that most Canadian programs do not have a dedicated field to Indigenous politics. And so this is our newest dedicated field. And I think it puts us on the leading edge of the study of Indigenous politics and what it means for the other subfields in ways that other programs are just beginning to grapple with. What I think really makes our department particularly interesting, though, is what our research clusters are. So many of these transcend those 5 subfields. You can see them here. Some of them clearly fit within some subfields. So the bombs and stuff like this is very much international relations. A dedicated study of Canadian political institutions is very much Canadian. But if you look at things like elections and representation, gender and politics, Indigenous politics, human rights, public opinion, theorizing beyond the liberal order. These are broad, they're extensive, they cut across conventional understandings of political science, and they really help to highlight the excellence of our faculty as researchers. So if you have specific questions about any of these fields, I'd be happy to talk about any of them, but this is what makes our department really exciting and really dynamic to be in. Okay. We have a student, Ryan Crosschild is here with us to talk about his experience in our program. The other thing I want to flag before I turn things over to Ryan is that if you are in need of a new podcast, there is a podcast that was done by 2 of our students, Holly Ching and Kelsey Gordon. Both Holly and Kelsey have started PhD programs this fall. And while they were here as master's students, they put together this podcast called The 7th Floor. We are on the 7th floor of the Social Science Tower. And so if you go to Spotify or Apple or wherever you're getting your podcasts, you would be able to hear interviews with lots of our faculty about, and also students just about what they're working on and their experiences in the program. So Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you. Do you want me to stop sharing my screen? I don't know if you have things to share or if you...
No, I should be okay. I think I'm just gonna, I'll just talk. Yeah, I don't have a PowerPoint or anything.
Okay, perfect. Over to you.
Awesome. Yeah, so as mentioned, I am a first-year PhD student. I also was in the master's thesis program, and the decision to pick a graduate program is a really important decision, and it's often filled with a lot of anxiety. You're wanting to pick. There's so many different things that you're thinking about. Particularly, I think within my own experience, it was if I could find a program that had a diverse range of kind of research streams, and as mentioned by Dr. Thomas, what's unique about the University of Calgary and what caught my attention is its emphasis and the concerted efforts of the department to not only have a strong kind of what we would think of as traditional political science, Canadian political science program. The department has also has an amazing kind of range of different research streams that span into things like Indigenous politics, which caught my attention, the theorizing beyond the liberal order, gender and politics, environmental politics, international relations. All of these different research streams kind of point to the strength of the department in terms of having that intellectual diversity within political science as a discipline. And for myself, when I was an undergrad, I really struggled to find kind of my own research interests and my own lived experiences reflected in a lot of kind of the mainstream political science literature or just broader kind of research endeavors that were taking place. And that's what caught my attention about the University of Calgary, is that it has created that space to do this kind of work, to do this kind of research. And not only that, it hasn't just created that space, it's also provided a lot of supports in terms of resources, in terms of mentorship and professional development, alongside amazing course selection that is very diverse and very exciting. And these are this is the strength of the department. There's an emphasis as soon as you get accepted into the department that you're treated as colleagues. You're treated almost as like junior faculty in the sense that there's this mutual respect that you're given as a graduate student. And there's just so many opportunities to not only kind of build on your repertoire of being a researcher or an academic there's an amazing cohort structure that, for me, when I was thinking about grad school, I thought of that, that kind of stereotype, or that idea that it's a very toxic, it can be very antagonistic place, it can be very anxiety inducing. And so I just thought that that was just what grad school was. But upon entering into the department here, it was totally opposite to what I had in my mind of that graduate school experience. I felt that I was supported as a grad student. I was provided amazing mentorship, and the cohort structure with other grad students kind of made for a more collaborative learning environment that really emphasized this kind of collective community in terms of balancing kind of the emphasis on research, but also an emphasis on kind of strengthening those community relations within the department itself. So I had when I was a master's student in the department, I received some amazing mentorship and opportunities in the form of going on research trips. I was able to go to the archives in Winnipeg, and I received some form of archival kind of research training from my supervisor at the time. I was able to go to to Cuba. I was able to go to Germany. There's like so many different opportunities that are available that I didn't even like think of when I entered into the program. And so it really, that kind of experience demonstrates, I think, for me, the emphasis that the department has placed on making sure that the relationship between a grad student and a supervisor is kind of in an ideal kind of situation, an ideal context that all grad students kind of wish for. And that is, I think, often not the case in many of these other institutions where the kind of I'm not sure how I want to talk about this, but I think it's more the unique kind of structure of the department itself is that it ensures that there is the ability to have those more one-on-one mentorship opportunities, which is really important. You really want to have that as a grad student, because it's very easy to kind of get lost in the fast-paced rhythm of being in grad school. But the university and the department has made great efforts to ensure that there is a strong supportive environment for a lot of grad students. And that's why I knew when I was looking for kind of PhD work that this was the place, this was the ideal place for me to do that kind of work. As I mentioned, also for me, my research is in Indigenous politics, and this was really what stood out about the department, is the real efforts to create that space to do Indigenous politics, because it's often kind of shelved in the corner of other kind of the field of study of Canadian politics. But the university and the department has made that effort to create that space for me to do this kind of work, having its own kind of comprehensive exam attached to it, having resources specifically dedicated to doing that. And it's been an amazing experience to not only have courses that reflect my own research interests, but also to have that those opportunities that you really need if you want to be a kind of well-rounded grad student, to have those opportunities to sit on things like hiring committees. I've had opportunities to sit on hiring committees. I've had opportunities to, like I mentioned, go on these kind of research trips to present at conferences, to really build those skills that aren't often that you don't necessarily get in a course environment. And so that's the other thing about the department that I really appreciate, is the emphasis on building kind of the skills necessary to be a successful grad student, to be a critical thinker, to know how to present at conferences. The department also has different colloquiums throughout the year, and that are kind of emphasize how to give a research talk, how to prepare for grant writing, and all of those efforts are have really helped strengthen my ability to be prepared for not only doing the intellectually kind of arduous process of writing a thesis or a dissertation, but also on things like how to secure research funding, how to kind of have a fully developed kind of research design, to have that kind of real life experience, and that kind of pragmatic approach to thinking about kind of the logistics behind doing research. And so the university has really made that effort to create that kind of an environment. And the University of Calgary is for me a hub of connection, where I find myself kind of moving between different kind of community spaces. It's a gathering place across the prairies. It's also right next door to the BC coast, and there's always conferences that are taking place in the city. My first conference was the Prairie Political Science Association conference in Banff, and that was an amazing experience, because the department really kind of created that space for young graduate students to kind of have that experience of presenting at a research conference in a way that wasn't that was very generative, and really kind of helped build students up. And I think if there's one thing that I want to kind of capture about the department, is its emphasis on kind of creating that generative learning environment for students that I just don't think you get anywhere else. Like these other it's very easy to kind of be treated as a number in a department, in a grad program. But the university and the department here has really made a strong effort to ensure that you're treated as like as a colleague, as a junior faculty almost. And so there's just so much with kind of having that framing and having that kind of an approach that has led to a lot of kind of amazing experiences for me as a grad student. And they're still like happening, like even as a PhD student now. I've been able to not only have opportunities to present in different classes, to be a part of different research projects, but through those efforts, I'm starting to really notice how important those efforts to ensure that that you're not only kind of prepared to do the work of writing a thesis or to go into coursework, but how to present, and having those opportunities to really put yourself out there, to create a name for yourself. The University of Calgary, and specifically through the leadership of the Department of Political Science, has really done a great job of doing that for their grad students. And there's whenever for me, the students that I know, as soon as we finish our studies here, it's like it's not even a question of whether or not we get placement. There's always placement for us when we graduate. That's kind of the strength and a kind of testament to the great efforts of the department. And so yeah, I think I'll just leave it there, but I just again want to kind of re-emphasize the efforts of the department to create that really kind of generative learning space for students in a kind of holistic fashion. And so that to me is a standout feature that you just don't find in any other department. It's again really easy to just kind of get lost and be treated as a number, which is not the kind of atmosphere that the department has created here. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. I really appreciate all of your candid sharing of your experiences, because I know, having also been a student in the department as well, and now teaching and doing a lot of work with the graduate program, it's a conscious choice to make sure that students are well prepared, and it's a conscious choice to make sure that they're supported at every stage of the process. And so this is why we want to make sure that students have the opportunity to present their work internally and get feedback from us, so that when they do go out, particularly with their research projects and all their bright ideas, that like forewarned is forearmed. So we make sure that like it's just seen to be a key part of the training, right? And also we want to make sure that our students are best prepared. I found this as a student with a master's from the University of Calgary, but we also consistently hear this from our alums as well, that especially from the master's program, where when they go on to PhDs, they feel exceptionally well prepared, and they also feel better prepared than many of their colleagues in their PhD cohorts. So the training that we offer is, I think, our students report back that they're very satisfied with it, because they feel like they can take the next steps if they decide to keep going on in academia, or if they want to go out into working, or very like launching their own businesses, things along those lines, that they do feel like we prepare them really quite well for that. Okay, I know that we've got some questions in the chat, and so I just want to highlight the details about how to apply briefly before we turn over to those questions. And so for the master's degree, we've got a minimum GPA requirement of 3.4 on a 4.0 system, at least over the last 2 years of full-time study. So we do take a look at the full degree, and then we also take a look at those last 2 years just to see where folks are at. I would, if I'm being candid, to be really competitive, you'll probably need more than a 3.4 GPA. But that's something we can chat about too if folks have questions about that. For the PhDs, the minimum is a 3.7. You can see all these details. They're on our website and things like that too, so we can answer specific questions about them. But the rationale for all of the admission requirements is to ensure that students have the background preparation to make sure that they will succeed in the program. And so this is why we look for a background in undergraduate training in political science to some extent, and why we have things like the GPA requirements. The deadline for application for everybody is January 15th. And so now is a great time to start getting your applications together and ready. Okay, so the first thing, I want to stop sharing my screen. Great. And so I can see that we've got 3 questions in the chat, in the Q&A rather. And if folks are okay with that, I'll go ahead and start answering these questions. And then as you have questions, you can either put them into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll take them from there, if that's okay. So the first question is a great one. It's asking how the increased number of student enrollment with like the addition of the course-based master's program to our existing master's thesis program, how will that affect class sizes and access or support from the staff? So I can speak directly to class sizes. Typically, we will admit anywhere between 6 and 12 thesis-based master's students, and we anticipate that we would draw a parallel with that for the course-based program as well, so that we would range anywhere between 6 and 12 for each. What that means as so I've taught in the graduate program every year that I've been on faculty here, so about the past 8. And honestly, my seminars have ranged from as small as 1 to as big as maybe 8. And so for a seminar, this is still a pretty low load for a seminar. So it means that we get to know each other really well. But I would say the addition of, so if we think about the size of the cohort, it would be split across all of those subfields. So you wouldn't have everybody who's been admitted in any one of your seminars per se. Like people would be dividing on the fields that they would be choosing. And so I think it would only really at this point be an addition. For me, having a class of like 6 versus like even up to of 14, all you're doing is you're adding new voices and thoughts to the room, which always makes the discussion stronger in my view. I don't know if, Ryan, if you have experiences on that, on whether or not what you found in classes that have been very, very small compared to seminars that are still, I mean, all of them are still under 20 easily. And so they're very much designed to always be seminars. Like there's no lectures or anything like that at this point. Yeah.
Yeah. In my experience, I think the largest class that I've had I mean, they've never gone over, I think, like 12. It still kind of maintains that seminar feel. And yeah, I haven't noticed kind of any with any issues in having too large of class sizes. And that's actually what I really do appreciate about the program, is its emphasis on kind of creating those really intimate spaces to have those kind of in-depth conversations. And the university does a really good job of kind of balancing that and making sure that we maintain that kind of seminar structure.
Right. And Denise, I don't know if you wanted to talk about that from like the staff support side, how you would see that, but.
Absolutely. I think that there's a lot of flexibility with your coursework, and I think that's important to recognize. Although we have those courses posted, if you found that you wanted to take something that you felt fit better with your thesis, Dr. Thomas or your supervisor would address that. So there's flexibility because we have small classes, and also understanding that it's very focus driven towards making sure that you have the best possible experience.
Mm-hmm. Great. I hope that answered the question, but if it didn't, feel free to put more into the chat and then we can go from there. The next question is where political psychology would fit within the research clusters, and it would fit in a few places. So a lot of my work focuses on gender and political psychology. So there's certainly an element of that inside the gender and politics stream based on my own research program, but also largely it fits into areas of public opinion. And so public opinion is one of these kind of larger, like cross-cutting umbrella fields where part of how people think, like it's just trying to figure out like what the public actually ends up thinking about a lot of politics and things. And so if I'm thinking about some of the best studies that I've seen in political psychology, they also solidly fit into the idea of understanding public opinion through a very particular theoretical frame. So I think we've got, there's lots of places where that would fit in, or I should say we have lots of faculty who are working on things related to political psychology. So if folks are interested in that, we have good support for there too. Okay, and then, so how are we supporting grad students with COVID-19 and what are our future plans for this? And so I can say like COVID-19 has certainly been a challenge for everyone, but things that we did right away were, and Denise can speak to this too, where we reached out and we were pretty, I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but we were very keen to make sure that as we pivoted to a remote environment, that students had access to the resources that they needed to be able to complete their programs. So like, actually, like, do you have the stuff that you need to have to be able to like continue doing your work at home? And then since then, we've been pretty, I feel like at least I tried anyway to be, and I can't speak for Denise, but I think that we're on the same page on this, where we tried to be very proactive in anticipating what students might need, in anticipating, and also like reacting when things had come up. What we're sometimes able to do is to offer greater support in terms of like extra TA-ships. The other thing that we also want to facilitate is creating space for students to be able to make sure that they're able to stay connected with each other and to continue with that kind of peer mentorship. And so we've got the Political Science Graduate Students Association, and I understand that they've been very active in maintaining, they're always very active socially, but I understand that they've been continuing and working really quite hard to keep doing this in a COVID appropriate way. So I know that there are PSGSA masks that are available. Yeah, that's one of those things where they provide a forum that's quite distinct from us. And so if students want to be able to be like, this is what I'm experiencing, is this normal? How many other people are encountering this? There's a dedicated space that's safe within the program for students to be able to access that as well. And Denise, I'm gonna put you on the spot and ask you to speak to how you see this going forward as the pandemic continues.
Well, actually, what I'm planning to institute is, because I'm not in the office where I can see students on a regular basis, like that's a big cue for me, is that visual contact. When somebody's walking down the hall, I can just, reach out to them and say, how are you doing? How are the courses going? How's your research? I heard you just presented. It starts the conversation that we want around being a proactive advisor. My job here is to facilitate your success. I take that very seriously. I think the whole department as a whole is a very compassionate and caring group. So if you weren't comfortable reaching out to me, for example, you would be comfortable reaching out to either another faculty member, maybe not even your supervisor, but another faculty member. That happens quite often, or within your own cohort. So I know our incoming first year MA students, because Ryan is our PhD student, but he was previously in our department, they've started their own little chat group, so that when they're running up, like right now is a deadline for the Tri-Council Awards. So it's a very stressful time for them. They're shooting off emails to one another. I've gotten a couple of email or text messages today while we're talking, asking me questions about how they submit their scholarship application. So we're always in contact. So even in this COVID environment, we're in contact. We are going to plan to open up, specifically for myself, I'm going to have what I'm going to call Wellness Wednesdays. And I'm going to have an hour blocked off every Wednesday where I'm just in a Zoom meeting. It's a drop-in session. People can stop in, ask me questions, but I'm always available. So I think that that's the benefit of having a small environment, is that we can pivot quickly and make sure that you still have all the access that you require to be successful.
So I'm going to skip down to a question that I think flows directly from this, which is the horror stories from grad students being so overwhelmed with TAing or RAing or their coursework that it really does have a negative impact on their stress levels and their mental health and wellness and things along those lines. So I feel this keenly. And we have structures in place to try to keep good boundaries on the work to make sure that it doesn't get to the point where it's overwhelming. So things that we have implemented in terms of structure right from the outset is that students that are admitted into the program there's a requirement pretty early on to indicate the kind of the courses that they want to take. And when we go and do TA assignments, we make sure that we work really hard to make sure that whoever is getting a TA assignment is done in a semester where their course load is not especially heavy if they're still in coursework, right? And for the thesis program, it's a little bit different because, the thesis is the thesis, and the challenge with thesis and research work like that is that the to-do list never ends. And so part of this involves supervision and mentorship with these. So what's an appropriate way to set goals and tasks? And I know with my supervisees, when I check in with them on a really usually weekly. And one of the questions I'm asking is, and what time are you taking off? I don't know if anybody knows anybody who's a serious athlete, but their training involves extensive napping. And I'm not saying that for grad students, you need to build in naps to your schedule, but sometimes you might actually need to do that. But part of it is figuring out how to put boundaries on the work is a key part of learning how to be a grad student, as in when am I going to shut down the computer and turn it off and not touch my work for a dedicated period of time. I'm not going to say that it's always easy to be able to figure out how to calibrate that properly. My favorite story about this as a junior faculty member was I left my laptop at the office on a day in June 2013 saying, I'm not going to be a workaholic who's going to carry their work with them together with themselves all the time. And then the flood hit and I couldn't get my computer for 2 weeks. And I was well, that's a forced vacation. And I was actually I was also flood evacuated. So I shouldn't have been working because my brain was not on point that way. And that's the other thing to note where this is why we try to make sure that lines of communication are as open as possible. So that when you come up with these questions about how best do I calibrate this to be able to navigate all the stuff that I have to do while also not hating it and staying well. There are different ways to do it, and there's no one right or one wrong way to do it. And so figuring out what works best for you through the advice of like our own experiences, that's one of the things that we really like to do as well. For TAing, this is one of those things where there's a collective agreement and a contract, and there's paperwork, which means that students will know at the start of the semester what work they are supposed to be doing and when it is going to come. And so this is where it would be completely inappropriate and actually like a violation of the contract for whoever somebody would be TAing for to change that on them mid-semester. Like that's not appropriate and it's just not done. And so in that sense, you would be able to plan around your TA duties as well as any other kind of like course or research related duties that you're doing. And then for research assistants, like an RA-ship can be really intense, but I would point out that political science isn't a lab-based discipline. So there isn't like an expectation that RAs would be like at their desk in a lab every day, like running the studies that you would in a bench science or something along those lines. And I know for me, the demands that I would ask of an RA tend to ebb and flow with my own schedule, which means that usually when we're asking for more intense RA hours, it's in the summer when you're not in classes and you're not TAing. And so, and I know that my experience as a PhD student, that was one where I would be regularly being an RA as well as a TA, as well as taking courses. But it was very clear and expected that like there would be the weekly coursework, and that's when I could do more RA work because I didn't have TA stuff. But as my TA duties came up, then the RA duties, like I wasn't expected to like deliver big RA reports at the same time that I had to do a stack of grading, at the same time that I had to write my own research papers. So it's an understanding that these things need to be staggered. Yeah, and I think this goes back to the idea that we care about each other in the political science department at the University of Calgary, and so we don't have the kind of culture where we are competitive or just want things done because they need to be done. Like it would be I would be horrified if I had an RA who was breaking themselves to get something done when it wasn't feasible for them to do it. Like this hasn't happened, and it's precisely because we take the job to like we do the work to make sure that that the workload is managed and mitigated for sure. Ryan, I don't know if you want to speak to your experiences about that, because I know you spoke candidly about having lots of opportunities to like go to archives and like present your work and things, and so you've got good experience with this for sure.
Yeah, those usually took place in the summer months, and so the RA work kind of wasn't. I mean, there's times where you have RA work, TA work, and then you have your kind of research papers that you kind of have to balance. But it's, I think it at the first kind of semester, at least for me, when I entered the program, was really kind of difficult to try and kind of get used to that different rhythm of work as a grad student. It is a tricky transition, but you get better at managing your time, and I think the key to it is really having good time management. The university, like I said, kind of has that understanding that we want things to be done kind of in a good way and in a quality way. And so it's not just for the sake of like delivering outcomes, because that can easily lead to burnout. And so in my own experience, it was always like an understanding with my supervisor or who I was working for that we were really clear, like this is when I was going to be busy. And so we were able to kind of plan accordingly. And there's that understanding when you're managing your work with your courses. And it's just a different kind of rhythm to doing work. And you also kind of have to figure out when you're most productive. And so for me, I know I'm most productive at night. And so it's kind of learning those things about how you want to go about doing your work and kind of fitting in and creating that kind of schedule. And that's what I really like about being a grad student, is that it's not that like typical 9 to 5. I mean, some cases you may have a day where you have classes like that, but it's not always like that. There's flexibility to kind of create your own schedule to doing work, and that's really what I enjoy about it. And I think of it more of like it kind of oscillates. So at one point you may be really busy, and then at some point you'll have like a really kind of low period where you have not really a lot going on. So it kind of like it oscillates between being very busy and where you kind of get that time to really do that more in-depth kind of learning with when you're preparing your thesis. And so I think that's something to also keep in mind, is that it's just a different kind of rhythm to doing work. And the transition part is kind of tricky, because you have to really learn about yourself and when you're most productive, and what you're good at and what you're not good at. And for me, it was figuring out that I'm a slow reader, and so I need to give myself that additional time to really prepare for my courses. Whereas when it comes to marking, I'm very efficient at being able to mark things. And so some people, it's the opposite. They need to take a little bit more time with kind of getting calibrated when they're going to start doing their grading for the TA work they're doing, or to write a research report. And so you really do figure out what your strengths are, what you're most effective at doing, and then kind of being able to plan accordingly. And that first year is kind of a transition year, so it is tough. It's supposed to be hard, but it's not supposed to be harmful. If it gets to being harmful, then that's when the university has measures in place to really kind of help students to be successful, because that's the kind of learning environment and culture that they've really kind of made sure to cultivate. And that kind of goes back to my own talk about how that leadership through the different supervisors and the staff, like it's so if you ever encounter those moments, that you have a safety net to really help support you through it.
Yeah, I think the overarching thing to keep in mind is the grad school teaches a new skill set, and learning new skills is hard. We don't expect anybody to come preloaded with knowing how to do any of this stuff, right? And so if it feels uneasy, if it feels like you're a bit unmoored, this is totally normal. And actually being able to be with a cohort, to be kind of like people being like, I'm feeling the same way, it's totally normal. And like for my I know for anybody who's been in a Poly 399 class with me, it's like, of course it feels terrible and weird. It's new, like it's so new, like, but so it's less, so I say that so that there's like no judgment for this idea that like sometimes like it's just learning a new skill. Learning a new skill is hard. Like, but I like this frame where it's like, being challenging is not the same thing as it causing harm. And so we really work hard to keep it from getting to that point. But if it does, and it's usually like external events beyond anybody's control are the things that might like tip things over into a direction where now we need to do something to make sure that it doesn't hurt. We do that, and we hustle to make sure that that happens. Like it's one of those things where our most important priority is our students. And so if something isn't going well and there's something that we can do to make it better, we do it like 100% of the time. Absolutely. And this is where I think it's really important that we've got good lines of communication, like with like somebody like me as the graduate program director, between students and their supervisors, between like students themselves with the peer support, but then also really importantly between students and somebody in Denise's position, like especially Denise, because Denise is such a rock star about this, where like she knows the rules, she knows the options, and like I also know like a lot of grad students are all going to be very smart, very high achievers, and you'll be your harshest critic about, particularly if you're getting at the point where something needs to give. And this is why you talk to Denise, because Denise is going to be like, you have options, here are your options. We will help you because this is what we do, right? This is not a program where we expect students to sink or swim and then we let them sink. We do not do this. This is not our approach, not at all. Not at all. I wouldn't take any kind of role in a program that did that. Like, it's just not what we do. Denise, I don't know if you want to speak to that as well, or?
One thing I would just like to mention is we try to set you up for success right from the get-go. Yeah. So when you're emailing myself or Dr. Thomas, or perhaps the person you're asking to supervise you if you're going to do a thesis program, this is long before you've applied. we try to address your concerns at that point. And you should always feel free to come back to us and ask us additional questions. Like, this is a complicated process. It's not complicated for me because I do hundreds of these a year, right? Dr. Thomas is the same. So there's no bad questions. And we think if we can set you up from the time that you apply till your admission time, then what we do is, as you're coming into program, we have a graduate orientation. We introduce you to all of the graduate students, not just your cohort, but everyone in program. We mix it up so that you get perspectives from both MA and PhD students, and you feel that connection. You're not isolated in our department. Because we're on one floor, that really facilitates communication. Everybody pretty much has an open door policy. So, you know, it's not unusual for you to come into the office and all of a sudden you have a question about something. You can stop in and see me. You don't have to make an appointment to do that. For the most part, you can probably stop in and see a faculty member. If they're teaching or they've got appointments, you may have to make an appointment, but it's very casual. We have an open space that facilitates communication, and that, I think, is why we're successful. And I also want you to know that in that orientation, we're going to give you the background so that you know what to expect. November is always a difficult month. It's going to be difficult. When I tell you that in September, you're probably not going to believe me. And then come November, you're going to be stressed. So I know what to look for. And those are the cues that I'm going to be asking you as you go through October. Where are you at? How are things going? How's the TA going? If you run into a problem, because we do understand it can be awkward sometimes to either address an issue with the instructor that you're TAing for, or possibly your supervisor, you may see that that feels like a weakness to you. It's not. It's a learning environment. Their job is to mentor you. If you run into difficulties and you can't talk to them about it, you can talk to myself or Dr. Thomas, and we help you get through that. So just know that the support is there. And whether you apply to our program or another program, those are the things you should be looking for, because that's what's going to ultimately make you successful.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so we've got 5 questions, and I think some of these are definitely quicker answers for sure. On funding. So funding comes from 3 broad categories: TA-ships, RA-ships, and scholarship. And so students, this is why we say that everybody should be applying for a social sciences and humanities research fellowship scholarship, because those are lucrative, and they make a lot of things a lot easier, and you don't pay any taxes on scholarship money either, right? Even a TA-ship, a portion of that is paid out as scholarship as well. And so the reason why we like, I know some people might be looking at TA-ships or RA-ships with a bit of a jaundiced eye and saying, I have to, like, so it is tied to some work, but that work is also tied to academic training, right? And so the TA-ship is an interesting one, because you'll have, especially as a new master's student, you'll have gone just from being an undergraduate, and then you're in a position where you're actually now teaching undergraduates, right? But in so doing, it helps clarify how you think of the material. It helps evaluate what's strong work, what's not strong work. So there's a really important, like, professional training element that comes to that as well. And for research assistantships, that would be funding that's tied directly to a faculty member's project, where you're literally learning how to do research, because under the direction of the scholar who's, like, running the study, they're going to tell you exactly what they would like you to do to move that project forward, which is literally like, it's like an apprenticeship, basically. It's some of the best skills I got were from working intensively as a research assistant. What typically happens with these, I know I put in a grant, and I don't know if we've gotten it yet, but if we do, what it means is that we have money to fund a master's student for a whole year, where we would expect them to be working on the project with us, but then we would also be giving them the information and the data that they would need to write their thesis with it. So we'd be seeing them very much as a partner on the research project. And for a student, I mean, that sets them up really well to go on for more advanced academic training, but it also, like, means that you can put it on your CV and being like, I've helped manage a project, like a really big, multi-year expensive project. Like, the project management skills that come from that are great too. So with the question about like, can I keep my part-time job while I'm in the MA? This is a tricky one because like the tension is I need to be able to pay my bills versus I need to be able to focus on my studies. So I know for me as a student, I did not work part-time during any of my graduate degrees, or when I did, I would like my part-time work was my RA-ship. Like that would be where I went to go and get extra funding to be able to help pay the bills for sure. Yeah. One of the things, so one of the challenging things is that's one of those questions about time management. So if you know that you, like I like to think about it as my A time, B time, and C time. And so A time is like the heavy lifting. Your brain is like primed to do all of the super hard work. B time is when, you know, you can do some challenging tasks, but it's certainly like, it's harder to do the really creative writing, like the stuff that requires really heavy lifting. That's B time. And C time is basically like my brain is not working. Like it's not very good for intellectual activity. If you can stack your part-time job in your C time, and that leaves your A time and B time clear to be able to do your studies, like that seems to be like, that would be fine, totally. What becomes a challenge is if the outside work that you're doing takes your A time, because that's gonna make it a struggle. Yeah. So it's kind of understanding like when you do your academic work best, and then off you go. Okay, can I change my thesis topic? Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to doing proposals and things like this, like writing a proposal, writing a cogent proposal is a separate skill in and of itself. You can write a really great proposal, but like the actual project itself might not be one that you're interested in, or once you start digging into it, your interest might be captured in another direction. The best advice, and I think I'm not the only supervisor, I know I'm not the only supervisor that gives this advice, is that you follow what you're interested in. Ryan, I don't know, did your thesis project take on a different direction when you, like, once you were in it? Like, did it, or was it pretty much what you had initially thought that you were going to do? I'm very much putting you on the spot, sorry.
No, that's fine. I had an idea, like I knew what I wanted to write on. It was on queer, Blackfoot, Indigenous kind of political traditions and how that kind of intersects in kind of contemporary political projects of political resurgence. And so that was kind of what I wanted to do. What changed was actually the courses that I was in. There was always this encouragement to write your kind of research papers in your classes that were leading towards that goal in mind. And so through that process, things definitely changed. I took a different kind of angle on trying to answer those questions, those research questions. And so the coursework was very kind of generative in that it helped me to think differently about how I wanted to approach my project. So the overall idea kind of stayed the same, but what changed was kind of the different methodological and theoretical components of how I wanted to answer those research questions. And so, yeah, it was there was a lot of kind of flexibility in making those adjustments throughout the entire process of writing my thesis.
Yeah, and it's not self-plagiarism to do your coursework on topics related to your thesis. It is in fact like the smart, wise way to approach doing that work. So I know I've had students being like, I have to propose something completely different than what I actually want to do my thesis on. It's like, no, there's lots of room for lots of work under the same topic for sure. And this also helps to identify where if you're a bit unsure about your thesis topic, like the coursework is a good way to trial that to see whether or not you actually want to keep going with it or not. Is there any less funding from the school due to COVID? Not due to COVID, at the risk of being blunt, if there is less funding, it's due to provincial government priorities. So if you don't like that, you should write your MLA. As political scientists, we like to appropriately attribute political responsibility for decisions in the correct spot. So, but not due to COVID. COVID is creating other challenges, but usually when it comes to mitigating COVID, we are, that's not the place where restriction is coming from. Other than like public health based ones. Okay, so this is a great question. What can undergraduate students do to know more about master's programs and who to talk to for supervisors and the like? So honestly, I think some of the best things to do for all of this, and I would add even asking for reference letters, is I'm sure if I ask you to think about it, you will be able to identify professors that you've had in undergraduate who you trust, who you think would give you really good advice, where you feel like you've got a rapport with them and you've got a good relationship. And I know it is intimidating to go to a faculty member and say, I'd like to talk about, I'd like to ask for a reference letter, or I'd like to talk about graduate school or something along those lines. But I think like if this was an instance where I would say be bold, it would be like be bold, but like be bold with the people that you know that you trust already, right? Like you had a great experience in a class with this faculty member. And even if you don't necessarily want to study something that's related to the class that they taught you, we've all been through this process. And we understand that like this is what a lot of mentorship is, where we know the process, we're on the other side of it. So come and talk to us about what to expect and who you need to, like the sorts of things that you might need to do. For me, one of the big things is, and this feeds into the next question, is we have international professional networks. And so if you want to study something, come and talk to one of us to say, where is the best place for me to study this particular topic? And so I can say for Donald's question, we have a faculty member who is a direct specialist in international political economy, and that's Kimley Tuxhorn. So I would reach out to him because he would give you very detailed advice about the kinds of IPE offerings that we have within the department. And so we would be able to, like, any faculty member knows their department well, knows their colleague's specialization well, and then also knows which other places might be good or which other places might not be very good to apply for some kind of work that you're doing. So yeah, I mean, I know the University of Calgary is very strong. We all want you to apply here, absolutely, for certain. But I would also be very candid, like I have to be honest academically, is that if I thought a student, like, there was a best program, I would advise them the best program. And I can only do that depending on what I know that they want to study. Yeah. So Donald, I would also encourage you to reach out to a faculty member named Gavin Cameron, because he also came from the UK as well, so can speak directly to that experience as well. So related to this, how many MA programs would you suggest that folks apply to? It depends on what you want to study. So I applied to one, to be honest, because I looked at other programs and they just didn't seem to be a good fit. And I had a strong undergraduate mentor who had strongly advised that I come to work back in the day with Dr. Lisa Young. And so I remember looking around and being like, the other options, they're there. They're just not good compared to what I want to do. I know for my PhD, I applied to many others, but I had one in particular that I very much wanted to go to, and that was the one that I went to. It depends on the subject matter that you're applying to as well, because some programs are going to be competitive and like great for the same subject. And in that case, having a really good mentor who's going to be able to help you figure out the cost benefit analysis of what's going to be really strong about one program, what's going to be really strong about another program, how do you decide which strengths and which features are going to be the most important for you? That's where that would help. So I mean, I think that what I would say about our program is that it is collegial and social and supportive, and we focus on like a whole kind of holistic package. We don't, we want our students to be competitive, but we don't negatively compete with each other, if that makes sense. Like we very much see ourselves as like a collective team, and when all of us do well, like this is the ideal. But yeah, this is where having coming and speaking to us about what you're interested in and what works is going to be key.
Maybe I would just like to address that as well, is just that fit is so important. So when you're applying to graduate programs, I would advise anybody coming in to look at the graduate programs, look at who you want to work with and connect with them, because just because they work in your field and it seems like they're up and coming, you're going to spend a lot of time with that faculty member. You have to make sure it's a good fit, and it isn't always a good fit. And you have to make sure the department is a good fit as well, because that's the only way that you'll be successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I won't say which program this was. It wasn't ours, not at all. We would have never done this, but I remember there was a master's student who came in for a single year program. And when they arrived, the faculty member that they needed to work with was on leave and not in the country, let alone on campus. And so the student was like, I literally can't do my program because you didn't tell me that the personnel that I needed weren't going to be here, right? Like, we would not do this, right? I would also say that, like, professionally, we wouldn't do that, but still, that idea of fit is going to be the most important thing. Yeah, for sure. Are there other questions? I know we've got to noon, but if there are outstanding questions that folks have, I'd still be happy to chat about. Can you switch supervisors? Yes, there is a process for that, for sure. So I know for our course-based master students, you wouldn't actually have to settle on a supervisor until your second semester, the start of your second semester in January. For any thesis-based project, so for both the master's thesis project and also for the PhD, I would say especially for the PhD, you're going to want to have like strong supervisory support lined up from the outset. Now, if you arrive and discover that your interests have shifted, or if you arrive and you feel like you would get better mentorship from another faculty member, there's always a process to be able to shift that. Like, we wouldn't force anybody to say the thing that they picked back in, like, but back before their program started was like, that doesn't lock you in any kind of way. So you would be able to move around if that's what was decided, what was best, for sure. Denise, can you comment on the transcripts question? So entering an MA program directly from undergrad, so my transcripts would be late. The one thing I can tell you for faculty is that the registrar gives us a very tight deadline, particularly for graduating students, and then we get yelled at if we don't get our final grades in quickly enough. So there are institutional like supports in place, particularly for students who we know need to graduate their undergraduate to get those grades in. And there's lots of pressure to make sure that we comply with it, for sure. But Denise will have better information on the actual transcripts. Yeah.
So absolutely, we have lots of undergrads that apply prior to completing that degree. That's almost an expectation that will happen. So what we request that you do is you upload, and when you're completing the online application, you're going to upload your student copies of your transcripts. I would recommend that you upload those after you have your fall grades if possible, because generally that gives us a better understanding of how well you're doing in the current year program that we're assessing. On top of that, if you are given admission, it will be a conditional admission on completion of that degree. So your official transcripts, you will submit them for January 15th if possible. If you need an extra week because a grade hasn't come through, you just contact me and I can extend that deadline somewhat because I'm using your student copies. But if you're given admission, then it's conditional on receipt of final transcript showing your degree completion. And we generally have some flexibility around that. Normally we do like a July 31st date because we understand some students may be finishing up a spring class in order to finish up their degree. It doesn't mean that you have to have walked the stage or convocated. It just means you have to have completed the degree requirements and can get documentation from that institution showing that your degree will be in hand by the time you start program for September. Just one other thing I'd like to address if you are considering applying to us. If you have applied for the MA SHIRK application, which is due December the 1st, we are requesting that you apply to our program for admission. And I'm going to say by January 3rd. I believe the deadline to do that is January 6th. But it's very convoluted. You don't see that on our website or necessarily on the Faculty of Graduate Studies website. So if you've applied for the Tri-Council Awards at the MA level, then please apply to our program by January 3rd. Even if you don't have all of your documentation, just complete the online application and hit submit. We want to ensure that you're adjudicated for those Tri-Council Awards. They're significant awards. Mm-hmm. They help us pay to fund students, and they show up on your CV as a very competitive award should you win it. So we want to make sure that doesn't get thrown out. We're also recommending that you apply to the graduate award competition. The deadline for that is January 15th. And if you have any questions about either the application or these two scholarship competitions, please reach out to me and I'm happy to answer those for you. And we can either do it over a chat over the phone or a Zoom meeting or just an email.
Yeah, those scholarship competitions are like, they're worth doing in their own right, just because it helps clarify your thinking around a project. It helps you build the skill to like speak very like targetedly about your work in a short document as well. But the line on the CV, like, I don't want to overemphasize this, but being able to be competitive in like, so how should I put this? There are lucrative entrance awards from the university as well, and you are going to want to be in the mix for those, because literally the only time you can get them is upon admission. So like, this is why you don't want to leave any kind of resources on the table for that. And then the other thing I would note is that once you start to get awards, this makes you more competitive for other awards. So it's kind of like this reinforcing effect. I will say I didn't know this. I had exited and gone into the workforce after my undergraduate, and then kind of applied for grad school, like basically I was at my desk and I really hated my job. And so I was like, back to school, I am going. And I didn't know about these things. I remember looking and being like, have you applied for SHRC? And I clicked, I didn't even know like what yes or no would entail in this one. And so that's why being able to reach out to somebody like Denise and knowing who to reach out to is going to be great. But I was able to get the SHRC award for my master's, and it made me more competitive for the PhD. It made me more competitive for postdoctoral fellowships. And like, it does like, if you were looking at a private sector employer, you can say I was deemed to be like meritorious for one of these awards, like my work and things like that. So they do it's not just like having a good volunteer line on your CV. It really is like a hefty one. It's a good one to have for sure. Okay, I'm conscious of the time, so I don't want to keep folks longer than you've got time for. So if you do have any other questions, feel free to email me or Denise, or any of us. Basically, like, if something comes to you later, just drop us a line, and we'll take it from there. Other than that, thank you for joining us, and I hope you all have a great weekend.